Welcome to Lessons in Dyslexic Thinking, conversations with the world's most inspiring dyslexics, where we find out what dyslexic thinking is and how each of us can employ it to change the world. This podcast is sponsored by Microsoft, who, like us, are passionate about empowering dyslexic thinking. Check out their brilliant immersive reader, free across several Microsoft 365 apps, which helps dyslexic thinkers to fly, by clicking the Microsoft link in the podcast notes. Today, I am totally honoured to be joined by Lonnie Ali, wife of the greatest dyslexic of all time, Muhammad Ali. And even better still, Lonnie, you are dyslexic too. As well as being married to the world's greatest champion and changemaker of all time, you are an incredible changemaker in your own right and a brilliant entrepreneur and businesswoman. You built up the super successful company Greatest of All Time to amplify Muhammad's life and legacy. And through your work with the Muhammad Ali Centre, you're helping to inspire the next generation of change makers with Muhammad's legacy and helping them to find the greatness within them. We always start our podcasts with a quote, but in true Muhammad Ali style, it was impossible to find just one quote. So I'd like to read two, which I think will set the tone for what we're going to discuss today. The first one I absolutely love is service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful sentiment. And the second, of course, is one about the greatest. I am the greatest. I said that before I even knew I was. And I think that is absolutely phenomenal. Not much has been said about Muhammad's dyslexia. Not much is known about it. But just before we kick off our conversation, I thought what would be really good would be to set the scene about his dyslexic thinking skills, because I think we all recognize exactly the dyslexic thinking skills he has when I read them. In the ring, visualizing, heightened 3D spatial awareness, which helps you to judge distance, timing, and space. Absolute essential for any great sportsman, and grit, determination, and perseverance. Outside the ring, challenging the status quo, communicating, storytelling, and connecting, all phenomenal dyslexic thinking skills. Lonnie, can you tell me, what do we know about his school days?
Well, it's interesting. I don't think then, Muhammad was born in 1942. So by the time he reached grade school, high school, of course, his dyslexia was not something that a lot of teachers knew about. They didn't know about dyslexia. They just thought you were challenged, academically. They thought, you couldn't read. Muhammad's dyslexia took the form of reading. He had trouble reading. And so, therefore, he really didn't excel academically. And it really came um, most visible, most noticeable in high school when you're doing, really intense work, academic work, sort of preparing to go to college, hopefully, or to start a career. And Muhammad was in his senior year. He had been training, going through a lot of different competitions in boxing, the Golden Gloves, and preparing to go to the Olympics, the 1960 Olympics. And he had made it through the Olympic trials, had qualified. So, really, that's where his mindset was. And probably because that's what he excelled at was sports and athletics, not so much in the classroom. In the classroom, it was more about the social setting, really. It wasn't about the teaching and the academics and the learning because he had such difficulty there. So prior to his going to the Olympics, he was going to graduate from high school. But it was obvious this child was on a trek that no other Louisvillian had been put on or was on, and he was about to flunk one of his courses. I can't remember if it was history or English, one of the two. And there was a decision made by the vice principal that I'm not going to be the one to flunk this young man and sort of alter his course in history. So he didn't. He gave him a D. So he sort of passed it. So he graduated. But Muhammad always felt that academics weren't his strong suit. And it was due to dyslexia, which no one knew about at that time. So even though he always encouraged education with children, even after that, all into his adult life, he always thought education was extremely important. And a lot of that may have come from the fact that he was so challenged by education, but he knew what education could do for someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that the focus of the Muhammad Ali Centre is around education and support and helping every child believe their greatness. We were incredibly lucky because we as a charity have partnered with the Muhammad Ali Centre, and we have some wonderful work that we're planning to train teachers across Kentucky and beyond. But what struck me when I visited the centre earlier this year was the whole theme and centre is based on the six core principles that Muhammad lived his life by, and I thought that'd be a really wonderful sort of way to go through this podcast today, because I know you share a lot of those core principles as well, of course. Um, the first one, which is probably the thing he's known for more than anything else, is his confidence. I remember as a child growing up watching just his amazing confidence, but the way he sort of said everything with so much humility and humor that he could get away with saying I'm the greatest of all time, and it had so much wonderful charm behind it. Um, what do you think created that incredible confidence in him?
Well, I think growing up, Muhammad had his father as a role model, and his father was quite an accomplished artist and very confident in his abilities. And he had that sort of inbred confidence that he sort of distilled upon his two sons, Muhammad, who was Cassius Clay at the time, and his brother Rudy, who became Rahman. And I think that was something that it was a daily dose that Muhammad received at home about what he could do. The sky's the limit. It's really what you put into it. And that was, I think, reinforced once he went into the gym and started boxing at the age of 12. So, these are very formative years of what his boxing coach would tell him, Joe Martin, about his abilities and what he could do and what he could accomplish and what he could become. So that confidence just continued to grow. But I have to be truthful and say that I have never met a man or a person as confident as Muhammad. He was confident about everything he did. And he never questioned himself, at least not publicly or out loud, about his abilities to overcome whatever that was. He just believed he could do it. And I think it was part of his training, um, even as a student, because of his dyslexia. What he could achieve mostly was through memorization. So, he overcame some of that. And I think that sort of laid the foundation too for some of that confidence of what he could achieve. But, Muhammad always felt that he was the best. Always. There
Uh,
was a tad, Kate, there was a tad of humility in there.
yeah.
Not when it came to his profession.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. So, I mean, champions are so important. Having somebody who believes in you, somebody who inspires you, and he obviously had his amazing father. But tell me about the red bicycle story, because it's fantastic to see that bike outside the gym in Louisville. I think our listeners would love to hear that.
The red bicycle story is important because had it not happened, I don't know that Muhammad would have ever become a heavyweight champion, won the Olympics, or become, evolved into the person he was and the icon he's become. But his parents had bought him and his brother bicycles for Christmas, and Muhammad's was a red Schwinn. And there was something in Louisville called a home show, and it was like a bazaar where people had a display of goods, and it was under roof. a lot of people in Louisville went. So Muhammad and his brother went, and they left their bikes parked outside of the door that led into this venue. But when they came out, Muhammad's bike was gone. And he was so mad because this was a brand new bike. And and back then, things were for a working class family, that was an expensive gift. He was so upset. So someone told him there was a policeman he could report the theft to in a building a couple of doors down, which happened to be Columbia Gym. So he went there and knocked on the door, and Joe Martin came to the door, who was a police chief. And Muhammad related the story that he had left his bike outside and came back, it was gone, and he was going to beat up whoever took it. So Joe, seeing the determination in Muhammad's face and the frustration, said to him, "Well, if you're going to beat up who took your bike, you better first learn how to fight. So maybe you should come back here tomorrow and learn how to box so that you can properly beat up this person." Um, so Muhammad said, "Okay." And he was all in. So the next day he came to the gym, laced up the gloves. Joe Martin put him, to work doing the fundamentals of boxing. And I think he never left. I think he was there every day because he was determined that he was going to learn how to box so that he could beat up this person. So I guess he wanted to be the best at that to make sure he gave the person a proper whipping. But that was the beginning of the story, and the rest is history.
It's such an amazing story. You touched there on his dedication, perseverance, grit. I mean, obviously, it's great to have the belief, but he had that side of things as well, which is it's something we often see with dyslexics, where they find something they love and they just do it again and again and again until they become the best at it. That seems to be as much of his confidence was that utter determination when he set his mind to something. Is that right?
That is absolutely true. Muhammad, not only was he determined, he could visualize in his mind, in his brain, what he was going to accomplish and probably what he looked like. I have been told by classmates, former classmates of his in high school, that when he was training for the Olympics, going through winning the Golden Gloves, winning these trophies and things, um, that his ambition was always to become the light heavyweight champion because he was smaller then, so heavyweight. He probably thought he wouldn't get to be big like a heavyweight, but the light heavyweight championship, and then eventually the heavyweight championship. He even drew out on paper, probably when he should have been paying attention in class, the jacket he was going to wear. He was going to design and wear once he became that champion. And he could see it in his mind. I think he saw the grandeur and the glory and the accolades and what it would be like to be that person, to be the light heavyweight champion of the world, and then first to win the Olympics and to be an Olympic champion. But yeah, that was that perseverance, that grit, that determination that propelled him, and sort of laid the foundation of everything he achieved in life.
His other amazing quote is, "If my mind can conceive it, if my heart can believe it, then I can achieve it." That's bringing all of those things together, isn't it? It's amazing. Whoever I talk to on this podcast, the successful dyslexics all have um, that visualization aspect. They know exactly where they want to go and they visualize themselves there. So it's a really powerful tool to help propel you forward. And he clearly had amazingly big goals, which he achieved. And then, in terms of his dedication, how early do you think that sort of dedication and perseverance came through? Was that something that his parents instilled in him as well? Because it seems like such a solid core principle that he had and applied to everything in life.
Again, I think I don't know if it was natural because anything Muhammad wanted to do, like you said, he did it repeatedly. You know, once or twice wasn't enough. If he made up a poem, he was going to say it 100 times, not just a few times. Especially if he thought it was something catchy or something that people would pay attention to. But I think he got that from his dad because his dad was such a dedicated uh, person to his craft of painting, of artistry. His dad was a phenomenal artist, not just in the painting and the drawing, but even in the wood carving. And there's really not much in the way of creative mindset that his dad could not do. Unfortunately, due to segregation in Louisville in the 50s and the 60s, and even for him, the 40s, for Muhammad's father, he was not ever able to achieve his dreams, what he thought he could accomplish, but it never made him stop trying. And I think he passed that on to his sons, that you always continue to try, regardless of what life's obstacles you may come to. You try to overcome them, make them work for you.
It's a brilliant time to come on to his conviction, and his strong sense of justice, which I guess a lot of that must have been born out of growing up in the time that he grew up and what he felt about human rights and justice. He was incredibly courageous, though, in the way he stood up for things, and he didn't just try and change things. He really sort of put himself in the firing line, so to speak, with things like I know when he what didn't want to go into the Vietnam War and everything that he did around that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know what? When you think back and realize at the age he was, I met Muhammad when he was about 22, 23, before he fought Sonny Liston the first time. And you think about that as a kid today. I look at our son, who is now 32, but, when you think about that, would Assad have done that at that age? When Muhammad was probably 24, 25, 24, really. And I think, no. Who would have the presence of mind to do something like Muhammad did, standing up to the government and saying, I'm not going? And I should tell you that a deal had been worked out prior to his scheduled induction in Houston into the army, that if he went into the army, that he would never have to fight, like pick up a gun, but he would do exhibitions, entertain the troops. But Muhammad so much despised the idea of war and killing people, he wouldn't even accept that because he felt like he would still be promoting uh, a war where people would be killed. And he just couldn't be a part of that. And even though that influence or that encouragement to accept that was coming from people who were managing him, people who were close to him, he said, "No, I'm not doing it. I'm not going. If I have to go to jail, I'll do that." Now, he never actually, even though he was charged for not stepping forward, making that step forward, he actually never went to jail, because he was out on appeal. But it didn't phase him. I think it worried people who knew him, especially his parents and his mom,
Mm, I
especially,
can imagine.
about him having to go to jail. And I remember seeing that on the front of a magazine. It might have been Look or Life. I think it was Look. I don't know. But this picture of Muhammad and about would he go to jail for 5 years? Well, I think it was up to 10 years, maybe. I don't know. But and I, even as a child, I said, "Oh my God." Because I didn't know anybody who'd ever been in jail, and I thought, "Why, what's gonna happen?" Even as a child, it created some angst in me, um, because his parents were my neighbors. They lived across the street, and I would see him every time he came home, and you couldn't help but love him. He was that lovable, charming young man that was everybody's son, everybody's brother, everybody's nephew. Everybody loved him. And I just couldn't imagine him spending time in jail and what that would do to his parents.
Yeah, it's an incredibly brave thing to do, to stand up for something so strongly and so publicly. I also heard a story, and I don't know if this is true or not, but when I visited the Ali Centre, you've got that amazing view of Second Street Bridge. And I heard a story that when Muhammad won his first gold medal, he tried to go into a coffee shop that he wanted to just go into to have a coffee with his medal, and he was refused to be able to sit in the area he wanted to sit in because there was still segregation. And rumor has it that he actually threw his medal into the river because he was so incensed by what he'd achieved, and he still wasn't accepted. Is that true?
Well, Muhammad never denied it. Let's put it that way. And the story, as he told it, was that he felt he had gone, he had represented the city, America, had won this gold medal in the Olympics, and he thought things would change for him when he came back. He thought things would be different. This, even though segregation existed in Louisville, um, and there were still places, black people weren't allowed to go. He thought that this would change things. He was naive enough to think this would change things for him. And when it didn't, I think it crushed him. That he had achieved all these things, brought this honor and glory to the city, was celebrated when he came home, got off the plane by the city, the mayor, people were out. But in real life, day-to-day life, it didn't change anything for the betterment, the social betterment of him or anybody else. And I think he was extremely frustrated. So I guess he felt the medal didn't mean what he thought it would mean. And he threw it overboard, threw it over the Second Street Bridge into the Ohio River. And that's what I was always told by him. And, I don't know any different.
And it's a big gold bridge now, so it's
Right. Well, it's the Second Street Bridge. It links Kentucky into Indiana, southern
yeah.
Indiana. But the Ohio's a big river. And I guess he went out there just reflecting on life and felt this is worth nothing.
Well, he went on to do so many incredible things to sort of move that whole agenda forward, didn't
He
he?
did.
One of the other things that I think just seems so fantastic about him, and I think this was one of the things you said you first felt when you met him. When I think you were 6 years old, weren't you, when you first met him?
I was.
And what was it that struck you about him most?
At first, I was frightened to death of him because he was so big, and I was this little, first grade student coming home from school and seeing this guy across the street that every young boy in the neighborhood, I shouldn't say every young boy, every boy in the neighborhood was surrounding. And Muhammad was sitting on, who was Cassius Clay at the time, sitting on the top of his mom's porch on the top step and like holding court, right? And he saw me in the doorway across the street and sent my brothers after me after they identified that's my sister. So it was his size, but it was his friendliness. I was extremely, extremely shy. And but he had a warmth about him, you know. He had a smile, he had a charm, he had a smile, he had a I don't know, just an aura that puts you at ease. But it took a few minutes for that to happen. Because, like I said, he was so big. To me, he was just so big. And I was fortunate because there was a gentleman there who was photographing him for Look magazine. And he took a picture of Muhammad and I when we first met, the moment we met. And not one photo, lots of photographs. And so those memories are very vivid for me. And but what's even more beautiful is that I actually have it in print, that I can see it.
Oh, that's phenomenal. And he was an incredible giving person as well, wasn't he? He very much believed to give without receiving, expecting or wanting to receive anything back, which is that's a very special thing to have.
When I met Muhammad, that moment I met Muhammad, one of the things that I noticed, he was sitting on the porch, as I said, on the step, but beside him was a cloth bag from a bank, a money bag, those sort of manila colored bags that they tie or
Yeah.
what cash in and throw it into the armored truck. And he had that bag full of money that he was going to give his mother. You know, I mean, that was my first introduction to him. And that was him throughout his life. Muhammad would literally give you the shirt off his back if he thought you needed it. And he really felt that if you recognized a need in somebody where they needed your help and you had the means to do it, that you were obligated without them even having to ask that you should do that. And that's the way he was. That's the way he taught his children to be. And that's the way, even with me, he was like that. He was, always showing that example. And Muhammad lived by example. And he would do it to a point where he began to worry that people would think that there was, you know, that he was being silly and not cautious and not prudent, that he was giving too much away. But he also had a belief that anything you could hold in your hand was worthless. It's what you can't hold in your hand that is priceless. So he didn't care. As long as he was putting a smile on somebody's face, he was helping them, he was improving their lives, he was making life better for them. He didn't care. He would give people his last dime.
And he also knew the power of his presence in terms of where he would choose to do his fights, and the power of the sort of money and industry that that would bring in, because he chose to fight in some very poor areas, didn't he, so he could bring the Muhammad Ali magic to that space. Tell me a little bit more about that, because I know you also traveled all around the world with him, didn't you?
I've traveled around the world with Muhammad, but not during those times, but he did travel and they would choose spots that, you know, to bring him to people that would not ordinarily have the opportunity to see him fight. And they were in some of the poor areas of the world, in places in Indonesia, when he did the Thrilla in Manila, in Zaire. Of course, he did a lot of fights in Europe, in Germany, London. Um, but he always loved going into the surrounding cities areas of where he was camped for a fight, like in Africa when he was in Zaire. In fact, that fight got delayed, I think, a month or 6 weeks because George got cut during training one day during sparring practice. And so they had to delay the fight. So that gave him more time. But Muhammad, see, that's what I'm saying. That to him, that was not an obstacle. But most athletes goes, oh my God, I sort of primed myself to be at my peak at this point, and now I'm going to lose that edge and whatever. I'm not going to be able to compete at my top level, of performance. He never thought like that. He thought, oh, okay, this gives me more time to, go out and meet the people. So he went out and it really created a little, fan base. I shouldn't say little, it was huge. He sort of melded with the people, he went out and he'd visit and he'd go and, become one with them. So by the time that fight came that night, that whole country was yelling for him. He had won them over. I mean, it was the sheer energy of the people who surrounded that ring that, I don't know, that was as much a force as his boxing skills and his ability to, as you say, adapt as dyslexics can do and overcome obstacles because George Foreman had flattened everybody who was in front of him before Muhammad, you know? But Muhammad realized that if he went a certain distance, nobody had lasted in the ring that long with George. But that energy that came from those people that he had taken the time to get to know, to become one with, and they felt like Muhammad belonged to them too. He was fighting for them. That gave him more, um, energized him more, I think, and gave him more ability to overcome an opponent. because he felt like he was not just fighting for himself. It wasn't just for this title. He was fighting for everybody around him.
Spirituality, I mean, obviously that's very much shaped his life. And what absolutely is incredible is the number of people around the world, from Jimmy Carter, who called him Mr. International Friendship, to all of the awards he's won for his work. Spirituality was clearly a really important part of his life, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Muhammad was always spiritually inspired. I've always felt that Muhammad had the hand of God on him in utero because he was just the things that we take a lifetime to learn that are difficult for most people. How to be empathetic, how to be compassionate, how to forgive, how to move on, how to treat your neighbor as you want to be treated, how to love thy neighbor. We say all these things, but it's not always easy to do. For him, it was like breathing, and that's the way he was. And his spirituality centered him. It was the core of who he was, and everything emanated from there.
And the Muhammad Ali Centre, all of the things that we've discussed today are so embodied in that wonderful. You couldn't really call it a museum, could you? It's just the most incredible energy there. What are your hopes? What Because I know that you were very very involved in setting it up with him, and both you and he decided it needed to be in Louisville, not in all the other places it could have been. What are your hopes for the Muhammad Ali Centre?
Well, when we imagined the Ali Center and what it would be and what it could do, it was all about inspiring people to become the best they could be, to build bridges between cultures and humanity, to resolve conflicts in amicable ways where it would be a win win situation, to relate to people as neighbors. Um, and these were, I mean, there was so much about Muhammad's legacy that is so um, deep, thick, rich, that we really had a hard time figuring out what to put there. His life is like a tapestry. It's like pulling threads out of that tapestry of rich colors and hues, and uh, but fortunately, he was here to help us with it, and that's what we wanted. But really, that is a repository of everything Ali, everything about him. Um, and also a place to preserve his legacy and to extend his legacy into other generations. Because the footstep Muhammad left was extremely large, and it was too important, I felt. And of course, he felt this way too, for it to be lost, forgotten after he left this earth. Um, there were lessons to be learned. There was inspiration to be had. There were aspirations to be had, and possibilities to be imagined. So that is what we envision the center. Currently, we are on a pathway. We just redid our strategic plan, and Muhammad was always one to adapt to the times, and we are really focused on mobilizing that legacy of Muhammad into the areas of social justice, um, and bridging the divides that exist not only in our country, but in other, across the world, across the globe. I mean, there's so much that is going on. And I just know that if Muhammad was here, his voice would be very strong, very resounding about resolving conflict, building those bridges between people, finding commonality, loving people and seeing the humanity in them the way he did. Um, and I think that's one of the problems. We look at people as objects. Muhammad looked at people as creations of God, something to be respected, revered. And hopefully we will be able to carry out that legacy for generations to come.
Yeah, it's a very special place. I would urge anybody to go. It really is very, very special. And I do hope that the work that we're doing with the centre around dyslexia and being able to talk about Mohammed and his dyslexia will be truly, I know it will be truly inspiring and hopefully spark that change, because dyslexia is one of the biggest reasons for children failing at school and not learning to read. And we can easily correct that if we actually train teachers, and it's so important that we really lean into dyslexic thinking skills, because they have a massive value in the world, as you'll know from all of the things that we've discussed today. We've come to the end of our time now, sadly. I could chat to you for ages and ages, but if I had one last question for you, and I guess if I could ask you, but also what you think Mohammed would have thought about this as well. If you had one piece of advice for dyslexics, young and old, or a quote maybe to share, what would that be?
I think that people who are dyslexic should never think of it as a disability or an obstacle. They should think of it as a gift, something God gave them a little special, little extra special, to make them think outside of the box, to give them really an edge on others who do not have those same capabilities as people with dyslexic, because they think different, they intake information different, they're empathetic, they're compassionate, they think big, they have vision. you know Being a dyslexic gives you that opportunity to explore those areas of your life. And with Muhammad thought anything and everything about him was great. So he would say, if you're dyslexic, you're great. All you got to do is follow through. And, I would say trust your brain. It's the brain God gave you, and trust it. Let it take you to the places you were meant to be, and climb the mountains you were meant to climb, and to aspire to be the best that you could be. So, I'm sure that all of us who are dyslexic find it somewhat as a gift, a way to be unique, to be different.
Absolutely, and as we've said, I think Mohammed just completely personifies dyslexic thinking skills in such a great way that I'm sure many of us would love to achieve that greatness. And hopefully, if we get just a tiny bit there, then we'll be able to make the world a better place too. Thank you so much, Lonnie. It was so lovely talking to you. Thank you.
So lovely talking to you too, Kate, and thank you for the opportunity.
If you'd like to find out more about what dyslexic thinking skills are and how to recognise them in schools, at work, or at home, you can take our free training now. Empowering Dyslexic Thinking in Schools, available on Microsoft Learn, and Empowering Dyslexic Thinking at Work, available on LinkedIn Learning. And please subscribe so you don't miss out on future lessons in dyslexic thinking.